Hello and welcome to the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. I'm your host, Nick McGowan, and on this show, my guests and I unpack the stories that shape us and the lives that we lead on our path to self-mastery. So, let's not wait any longer. Let the games begin. Hey, Pat, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
I'm great, thanks, Nick. How you going?
I'm good. It's funny, when we first jumped on here before we hit record, and we're just shooting the breeze, talking about the episode and all, I'd asked if you were drinking coffee because you told me it was 4:30 in the morning. So, man, I appreciate you getting up and having as much energy as you do. I'd basically be dragging my ass around for 15 minutes at least at 4:30 in the morning, and here I am 12 hours apart from you. But man, thank you for jumping on, being awesome. I'm excited to get into the stuff that we're going to get into today. So why don't you give us a little bit of context? Tell us who you are, what you do for a living, and one thing that most people don't know about you that's maybe a little odd or bizarre.
Yeah, so I reside in Perth, Australia. So that's the time zone difference. And previously, I was in the construction and property business or industry for the last 20 years. But in the last year, I've shifted. So I started to learn to trade the Australian stock market initially, and then from there, I got into a mission that I felt sort of pulled towards, which was to help single dads. Something that I've experienced myself, and also from the perspective of a child as well. And something interesting or odd about myself. So the only one time that I've ever been to the snow was in Austria, and that was actually a surprise trip for my birthday. So we went from Florence by train overnight to Austria, and so I woke up in the snow and I was like, okay, cool, no worries. No one's there at all in the town. I thought this is a bit odd, it's a bit strange. So we go to the sort of the ski shop. That's not open either. Like, okay, this is interesting. So we get on the bus to go to the where the snow is, and everyone's there. So we found out there was the Austrian national holiday. So I'm seeing these little kids at age of like 6 going down the mountain with no sticks, and I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And so I've never experienced the snow or skied or anything like that before, and I was adamant that no, I didn't want to ski. I wanted to snowboard, and so for the majority of the first day, because there wasn't enough time to organise a lesson, I was pretty much eating snow, and we went in at lunchtime for a bit of a break, and I took off my jacket, and I was absolutely drenched, where everyone else was completely bone dry. So that's one of the stories that I haven't really shared too often. But yeah.
Yeah, I kind of wonder how you'd get into some of that stuff. Like, that's not like a random thing where you're like, hey, nice to meet you. I'm Pat. By the way, when I was little, this thing happened. You're like, what? Okay. I guess it's only, shit like this where some random bearded dude's like, hey, tell me the weird thing about you. But what a hell of a story, man. I mean, even just, so the people here in the States, that's not typically where somebody's like, yeah, I first experienced snow in Austria. Oh, that's pretty awesome. Typically they're like, yeah, I was somewhere in Jersey and it started to snow and it looked dirty. Or something like that. It's funny, as somebody who's in Florida, I appreciate that I don't have snow down here, but it is cool to be able to go see it every so often. And that's just an interesting thing. Are there any parts of Australia that get any sort of snow?
Yeah, so more towards the east side of Australia, where I'm originally from, like Melbourne, in Victoria. There's parts, you got to travel out probably maybe 3 hours from the city, and I believe in the Blue Mountains in Sydney, New South Wales. But they're pretty much, that's it. They're the two locations where you get snow. Other than that, the closest country would be New Zealand, that people venture to. But yeah, snow for us is not a common, appearance. So if we get a bit of hail, that's like kind of snow for us.
Sure, that's more like destructive snow. Like shit, my car windshields are going to be busted out snow. That's funny, man. So that is a little interesting. But let's get into the reason why you're here. Let's talk about the resilient dad thing. So it looked like there was some stuff that you just went through some turmoil, kind of growing up, but then found yourself in a similar spot that you didn't want to be. So kind of start us off from where you want with the whole resilient dad story.
Yeah. So the journey obviously begins as sort of a child going through that experience. But and one of the things that I always said that was, I'm just going to make sure that if it's the only thing that I ever do, I'm never ever going to have my children in the same situation. And be known, I recreated the pattern. Unfortunately, my first son, his mother and I, we just separated prior to finding out that he was, that she was pregnant. And, I thought it was, the right thing to do to try and stick around and support through the sort of, initial stages. But with something like that, there's, a lot of emotions and so forth. And, unfortunately, the co-parenting experience wasn't the greatest. And, spending like 4 odd years in family court. My son's only turning 6 next month, so it's pretty much the majority of his life. And so through that experience of going through those challenges, like my health and my life was pretty much like a yo-yo, just constantly going up and down, to the point where I couldn't manage without antidepressants. It was like a necessity. It was like pretty much like air for me. If I didn't have my tablets, it was like I'd freak out. So that was the kind of state that I sort of got into. And then it took for me to sort of get away from my situation and saying that I've had enough. I can't continue like this because I've got 3 young boys, and I need to step up and become the dad that I want to, and the role model for them. So I guess I reached my threshold, and that was kind of my turning point.
Yeah, that's got to be tough as a kid yourself, being like, fuck, I don't want any of this. I don't want any parts of this. And in fact, when I get older and have children, I'm not going to do this. And then you find yourself being like, fuck, I'm doing this. This is how this thing worked out. I had a similar situation. My mom and dad, honestly, I think I'd say they probably fucking hate each other, which sucks because there are times where I try to put them into different, like the same room to be able to talk. Because look, I'm a grown ass fucking man at this point. We should be able to talk about things. But there's still stuff that they had gone through that was trauma for them, that was also trauma for me. And I've kind of said the same thing. Now, I don't have any kids, at least yet. I'd like to have kids at some point. But honestly, dude, I've said the same shit where I'm like, I don't ever want to go through this. I want to do this differently. So when you found yourself in that spot, then it sounded like the antidepressants and like needing your pills was a thing where you were like, oh shit, I feel like I need this stuff to do this. Was that the like breaking or the waking point, or was there something else that happened that kind of slapped you in the mouth and you're like, oh, I need to do something different?
Yeah. The other major sort of impact that going through that experience had was I had a habit of like, I'd be constantly eating, and not good food. I'd be eating, for instance, McDonald's for breakfast. I think you guys call it Burger King in the States for lunch, KFC for dinner. I might even have a second dose somewhere during the day. And I went from like 107 kilos to 137 kilos within months. So 30 kilos, which I believe is like something close to 50, 60 pounds for you guys. And I could reach that threshold and snap it back where, I could drop 20 kilos in 10 weeks. But it got to the point where it was affecting, like I'd have constant high blood pressure. I'd develop like sleep apnea. and that's where it was kind of like, okay, if I don't actually do something, forget about potentially me not being able to cope through the situation. My health is going to take me. So that was kind of one of the other factors of having those, getting into that, that pattern of, or those destructive patterns, where, I thought in the interim they're great coping mechanisms, but that's it. They're very short lived.
Yeah, just like McDonald's and most of that shit is a great idea until afterwards, and you're like, oh fuck, no, I shouldn't have done that at all. But were you using that to just? I'm looking for the best way to put this, but I think the easiest way is basically a little dopamine hit of like, I know I can get consistent shit from this, and it'll make me sort of happy. After you went through that, did you find yourself being able to actually process through the stuff that was not making you happy? Or was it just more difficult for you to like work your way through that addiction to then work your way to what the actual problem was?
Yeah. It was actually moving, interstate and moving away from, the industry that I was in. Because, I'd pretty much start my day, 5 o'clock in the morning, because we started at 7 o'clock in the morning, sort of on site, and I wouldn't see my wife or my kids. I wouldn't see my kids when I come home. I'd barely see my wife, and that for the last sort of 4 years, that was it. Like, I've got to work my ass off. I've got to get through this while dealing with all the other stuff. But then being able to shift and sort of move away from that environment and just sort of take a breath, I was actually able to analyze some of my patterns, and like, it was funny. I was going through some photos because we'd been unpacking and so forth, and I'd seen photos of me as a baby, and one of them was my grandmother and I, and she was feeding me. So, and two of the closest people that I had in my life were my grandparents, because my mother and my father had me quite young. So my mother was a couple months shy of 18, and my dad was 21. So I'd spend a lot of time with my grandparents, and that was one of the ways that they showed love, which was through, food. And then I realized, like, shit, this is how I'm seeking that love and connection through food, because that's something that has been sort of ingrained in me as a child. Like, that food is a place of, love and family and all that. So it was having that time away to be able to realize those patterns, and then, this pattern's not actually serving me, and it's not actually helping me. And what are the things that I can actually do to replace those patterns? Because I think it's great to get rid of the pattern, but if we don't replace it with something else, we easily go back to it. So yeah, I was fortunate enough that during the move to the other side of Australia, I was given a gift from a friend to an event, a Tonny Robins event called UPW, and it was literally one of the best 4 days, because it's a completely different environment to what I was used to, and some sort of insights into myself really helped me to start formulating sort of an understanding of why I was doing certain things, as well as being able to see, okay, what is it that I actually want? Because we focus so much on what we don't want that we completely forget about what we want or why we want it, and that really sort of helped.
I'm sure that 10-day challenge where you can't eat anything with a face at the end of UPW, I'm sure that helped with the whole nutrition thing.
Yeah, that's pretty much the start of the no caffeine.
Yeah. Oh, it makes sense. All right, cool. I've done UPW a couple times. And I know that can be one of those shockers, in a sense, that can shock you out of the system that you're in. But it's interesting, the shit that you went through when you were a little kid to now being in the spot where you need to kind of fix yourself and get yourself out of that spot. I would imagine that's got to be pretty difficult, being in the industry that you're in, having to work with different guys that are I don't mean this in any derogatory way at all, but they're grunts. Some of them are just grunts and just almost brutal, to the point where they they won't allow for things to be able to open up and have conversation. And if you're around that constantly, and then same with the food, you just keep putting the shit in your system because it's just easier to do it. It's like an easier of use sort of thing. So what was it that you found after UPW that helped you to be able to kind of stick to that stuff outside of like the whole adrenaline? Because we get it. Whenever you go to any conference, you're all fucking excited. And you're like, yeah, we're going to do this thing. I'm all hype. And then you come back and you're like, shit, real world. So how did you go from that and be able to continually grow from it?
So one of the biggest things that I started with was, I was like, you know what, regardless of what happens during the day, the mornings are mine, and this is where I take care of myself. And I created this morning sort of, I guess ritual or pattern where I'd, start with, for instance, just a 45-minute walk. So it'd be like 4 a.m, and I'd just go out there. There'd be no one there, and it was a perfect time for me to just get out there, get some fresh air, and move my body. Because one of my goals every day was I'm going to get at least 10,000 steps in a day. So that helped me sort of on the, halfway pretty much to my goal during that 45-minute walk. And then from there, I would, listen to some sort of educational or positive sort of, recording during the walk. So utilizing, my time as efficiently as possible. And then, I'd do a 15-minute sort of stretching workout exercise where I'd look after sort of, my body in terms of alignment and so forth. Because, I used to be an addict of pretty much going to the osteo, chiro, or the masseuse because my back was always an issue. Like it was a weekly occurrence where from that, I was able to pretty much, not need those, therapy because I was actually taking care of myself. And then I'd finish up by jumping in the cold shower for 3 minutes. So every day I get into a full-on, I go as cold as I can, and I get in there for 3 minutes. And that pretty much just shocks the body and wakes me up. And I used it on the weekend where I was kind of sort of in my head for a little bit, and I was like, okay, there's a pool out there, it's winter, I'm not going to get into the shower, I'm going to jump in the pool instead. So I jumped in the pool and it was freezing, but as soon as I got out of it, I was like, okay, sweet, completely got out of it.
Wake you up.
Yeah. Because that's the last thing you're worrying about is
An actual shock to the system. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so creating that morning routine where it was like, okay, it's not time that I could be spending with, my family or my kids or anything. I'm well sort of prior to everyone waking up, but I'm taking care of what of myself every day. And I think creating that helped me to be able to manage with whatever else was going to happen during the day, because I'd already taken care of myself and I wasn't necessarily just putting myself sort of last and trying to deal with everything else and leaving it till at night time, and where you pretty much can't be fucked like at night. And yeah, so I was like just focused on morning routine and what are the things that I can do today to move the needle just a little bit forward. Where prior I was always about, okay, I got to get from 0 to 100 now or yesterday. Where it's like, okay, that hasn't worked in the past for me, so what's actually sustainable? So, and that's where I've slowly built additional habits on that have really sort of helped me to change things around.
Yeah, that consistency, especially in the morning, when you think about the time that you have, be it if you're at home by yourself or you have kids around or whatever, you have that time to be able to do whatever you want in the morning. And I think that's our fresh time where we're not saturated with bullshit. I mean, here you are at super early in the morning on this sort of call. But there's a lot that you can get into on your own to be able to work through kind of the unknown of life before you get in and start figuring out again who you are as a person. Oh, I got kids. Oh, I got a wife. Oh, I got a job. I got this. I got that. I got this. I got that. So having those routines are huge. I actually had a guest on recently who was talking about how it hit him, and he's heard it different ways. I'm sure, you kind of said it around the same way, but he's heard that, you have to you have to give yourself love and energy before you do anything for your family or friends or whatever. And he's like, I heard all that bullshit before. He's like, it wasn't until it actually sunk in and I got it and was like, oh my God, I'm giving them like half or less than half. If only I spend a little bit of time in the morning, then I can prep myself to be able to do that. Now, how are you helping dads in that sort of way to be able to be better dads before kind of shit hits the fan in a sense?
Yeah. So a friend of mine recently reached out that we hadn't spoken to each other for ages. So we used to coach kids basketball probably about 10, 15 years ago. And he said, look, it's like, I think what you're doing is great. I'm going through a similar situation. And I called him up and said, like, let's have a chat. Let's see what's been happening, and being able to listen to what someone else is, and connecting and listening to what someone else is, has to say, and that's pretty much one of the big things is allowing people to be heard, and then giving sort of like asking questions. I found it extremely powerful. That even I use it to myself, like I ask myself questions like, okay, what part of this have I contributed to this situation? How may the other person be feeling in this situation? And it's amazing when we start to ask ourselves questions, or whether in terms of asking questions to other people, they pretty much, we all have the answers within us. It's not that we need the answers, it's the answers there, but it's just being able to open up ourselves or someone else to that realization that, okay, these are you've pretty much got the answers already here, but it's just guiding them to that, because we can get so stuck in our heads that we completely have the inability to think clearly, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's almost like I think we're all pretty innately good at being able to talk yourself in and out of things. Therefore, you talk yourself in circles and you're just spinning and spinning and spinning. But being able to talk to somebody else, I find that at different times, having client calls or just conversations with friends, they'll talk through things and they'll say, this is a problem. And then as they talk through and you ask a couple questions that are, solid questions, not like, hey, what's your favorite barbecue sauce? But like an actual relevant question that can get to the point. They're like, oh shit, I think I figured it out. Because you're right, we do have those answers that are in us, but it actually takes us talking and being able to get people to talk. Now, do you find that a lot of dads, especially the ones that you talk to and you work with, have a hard time actually being able to open up?
I think once you show vulnerability and that it's okay to feel the way that you feel, the emotions are natural, and even for instance, like crying might be one of the things. It's like, I can't cry because I'm a man, and I'm like, no, that's bullshit. Like, it actually, like for me, it's helped me, process obviously through the moment, and I see it more as like, okay, I'm not going to ignore what's going on right now. I'm going to deal with the situation and the emotions and everything, because I'm not going to allow it to have control over me. And once I'm able to, face it up, I feel like I have actual, I empower myself to be able to deal with the situation. And I see that with other dads as well. As soon as you show that, the vulnerability, and they feel connected because, you've gone through the same experience, then they feel like they have the permission to be able to be vulnerable and open. And it is honestly beautiful to see when they're able to transition from that hatred, anger, to the insights and understanding and being able to deal with their emotions and have that self-awareness of being able to catch themselves of what's going on when things happen, and understanding that, like, we're all human, we're not going to get everything right. And once I see that dads are able to understand that, it's like, oh, okay, I'm okay. This is like this. I will get through this, and things will be all right.
I have a suspicion that a lot of this bullshit of being a man and what we think is supposed to be manly is from trauma from previous generations that has just been continually fucking passed down, where they're like, well, my dad was a douchebag and I don't know why, but I'm going to be a dick to you as well, kid, and just keep passing that stuff down. Now, I think there are people throughout the course of time that weren't like that. But I think as things change, I'm seeing something even happening now. Some of it might be because we have the amount of technology and amount of information that's at our fingertips. But it seems to me like that's starting to change, where people like yourself are like, that was bullshit back then, and it's bullshit now, and needs to stop. But do you think that we can actually make that change as men, to be able to allow ourselves to be emotional and not not in a sense be like, all right, well, I got to fucking put dirt on it, get back in the game here?
Yeah. I definitely believe that going through those experiences, build strength in us. And I think the more people that show that, by being able to deal with things is being strong and having vulnerability to show your emotions, and that isn't necessary. It's not a weakness. And the more, that men decide to sort of be able to take that stance that isn't a weakness, I think that helps other men, or whether it's their children, to be able to see that it's okay to feel the way that you do, and to be able to have those emotions. I even catch myself, even with my 3 young boys, at times it's like, okay, nah, stop, because I kind of see myself sometimes, and it's like, and I see them, me acting as like maybe one of my parents, and it's like, okay, nah, stop, take a breath, and then I generally will get down to my son's level, whoever, whichever son it is, and I'll just talk them through it, instead of being like, no, just stop it, that's it, like, go over there, or just go do this, because just because I said, it's like, no, like, if I don't help them in terms of being able to communicate with them, it's like, how are they going to be able to communicate and deal with problems later in life?
Yeah, they're not. Just straight up won't be able to. And especially for you to be able to take that on and know, like, all right, I shouldn't do that. Those kids are seeing that. I mean, there are times where I find myself being aware, typically when I'm out driving, like somebody will cut me off or something. I'll be like, what the fuck? And instantly I'll hear my dad come up. I'm like, man, that was one of those things you taught me to freak out as a kid. And you have to like kind of pull yourself back from it. But having kids in the car, when you're like, what the, I'm sorry, child. All right, let's do this a little different. That's some deep level of awareness, man, to be able to do that. And it sounds like your morning routines are probably helping with that, because that gets you in the right sort of spot. So outside of the morning routine, what sort of advice would you give to the audience that's listening for their path towards self-mastery?
That anything is possible. And literally one of the sayings that I've heard through the Tonny Robins world is that, our past doesn't determine our future, and we all have the ability to make change. And it's a matter of, making that decision and action and commitment to what you actually want, and focusing on that instead of not what you don't want, and being able to set a strategy and a routine in place, and then you just slowly build up on each habit, and eventually you'll be in a completely different space. It might take 12 months, but that transformation that you can make in 12 months is incredible.
Yeah, and if you're going to live another 12 months anyway, why not? Just keep going. So, man, Pat, I appreciate you being on. Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, resilientdad.com is our website, where we upload our weekly podcast episode, as well as Facebook, Instagram, at Resilient Dad.
Perfect. And is that the plug for the podcast as well? Is there anything else you want to add about the podcast?
No, that's it. We just it's pretty much just trying to share my own experience, which I hope that is able to help some dad, because it's for me, being able to, had I been able to sort of listen to someone else's experience and know that they were able to get through it, it would have made my journey a lot easier. So that's pretty much the whole purpose of the podcast, is to be able to hopefully give someone else the insight that they can get through this.
That's good stuff, man. Keep up the great work. Everybody go check out the podcast, Dad or Not. I don't have any kids. I'm going to, so you should too. Pat, again, it's been a pleasure to have you on, man. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nick, for having us on your show.
Another great conversation on today's episode of the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. So, what did you think of the show today? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and check out the Instagram or Facebook page to join the conversation. If you enjoyed the episode, please jump over to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and leave a 5-star review. It helps us be found and helps others be healed. If this episode opened your eyes, made you think, or smile at all, then I'm sure it'll do the same for your friends. And check out the show notes for more info from today's episode, and check out other episodes on the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show.com, as well as our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and look up the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. And thanks again to our incredible guests for being real, honest, and vulnerable with us today. And I'd like to thank our sponsors. And most importantly, I'd like to thank you. Thank you for hanging out with us today. Your support means the world to us. And with that, remember, your mindset matters, and so do you.